impala are intelligent and hyper alert. Of course, dogs catch one by working together as a team. Of course, as you can see from their fur, that patterning keeps them disguised. Of course, their prey can only see in black and white, but they do have very good hearing, so the dogs have to be stealthy as well. But unlike the cats who are hoping to pounce on their prey, the dogs don't do that. They're happy for their prey to run. In fact, as soon as they get close enough to like a herd of impala, they begin the chase. And some dogs will run to the side of the herd, while others start the chase from behind. The dogs on the side are called flankers. Their job is to cut off any escape routes. Now, the impala herd's first line of defence is to stick closely together. But of course, the dogs have the tactic of teamwork, and if they separate one from the herd, they all move in, like the lead dog chasing from behind and the flankers blocking off its escape route. And while impala have speed, the dogs also have another tactic, stamina, which means they can run for longer and longer periods than their prey. So eventually, once their prey gets tired, they bring it down. And dogs are, like all members of the dog family, they have a very strong bite force that can go through flesh and even bones. And a pack like this kills once a day, and everything is eaten. But of course, while they are Africa's most successful predators and also one of the most unknown, they are also, unfortunately, some of the most threatened species of the dog family. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, the first is, of course, habitat loss, where much of their habitat is being destroyed for farming or plantations or towns, but also that's bringing them into conflict with larger predators like lions and hyenas. Of course, there's also hunting for their fur, but also with human-wildlife conflict. With dogs are sometimes going for livestock, and farmers retaliating with shooting, poisoning, or trapping them. But also, like all members of the dog family, the wild dogs are also susceptible to rabies, which is a fatal virus that affects all members of the dog family, and they quite easily catch it when they come into contact with stray or domestic dogs. Because of that, their population has dropped dramatically over the last 30 years. But there is hope. Conservationists are working to protect the dogs, like with vaccinations given to local domestic dogs to prevent the spread of rabies, but also with preserving the habitats they live in and bringing in tourism, tracking the dogs down with cameras rather than guns is another good way to protect them. In fact, this was their historical range, but now it's their present range and their strongholds. In fact, one of their strongholds is actually right here in the Okavango Delta in southern Africa. Now, for the largest primate on the planet and one of our closest relatives, the mountain gorilla. Gorillas are the largest primates on the planet. And of course, when I say the largest, you can see here a fully grown male silverback gorilla. While he'd probably be no taller than me, he'd be at least 2 times my weight and a lot more muscular. In fact, it was just over 100 years ago that the first outsiders came to the cloud forests of Rwanda, Uganda, or the Congo, which is where these animals live, and saw mountain gorillas for the first time. And they brought back stories of these terrifying beasts that were incredibly strong and could rip a man apart with their bare hands. And that, of course, is what inspired the stories of Tarzan and, most famously, King Kong. Because we've learned a lot more about mountain gorillas since then. We know that they're actually herbivores, which are creatures that feed on plants, and they are generally peaceful animals, and they're only aggressive when they're defending themselves, or more importantly, their family. Of course, mountain gorillas, as I mentioned earlier, they live in the cloud forests of Rwanda, Uganda, and the Congo. Of course, they live in close family groups of around 30 to 40 animals, which are all led by one dominant male, which is the silverback. And of course, as I also mentioned, they're herbivores, which means they feed on plants, but although they are herbivores, they do have enormous teeth and massive muscles, but they don't serve any purpose at all for feeding. They're all purely for fighting and for defence, because if a group of gorillas is threatened by something like their natural predator, a leopard or a crocodile, or even in some parts of the world, potentially chimps, the mighty silverback will put on a big display, like beating of his chest and even giving a low growl like a to try and scare them off. But if that doesn't work, he goes on the offensive. And of course, quite often the mighty silverbacks even have to fight off rival males, and this can result in hefty punches, biting, and screeching and chest beating. It can be quite scary, but unfortunately these days the mighty silverbacks are not just putting their lives on the line to defend their families against leopards, crocodiles, chimps, and rival gorillas. Unfortunately today they're facing human foes, and the strength of a silverback is unable to fight off the poacher's bullets. Because the hunting of gorillas is illegal throughout their range, but gorillas are also being poached illegally. They are hunted for sport, but also for the bushmeat trade, and for their body parts to be sold as ornaments, but also quite often young gorillas are taken from the wild to be sold as exotic pets to disreputable zoos, or for tourists to have their photos taken with, or to a rich man's private collection. Of course, it's meant now that there's only about 700 to possibly only 1,000 mountain gorillas left in the wild. But also, habitat loss with deforestation is another big threat to their survival. But also, like humans, gorillas are also susceptible to the Ebola virus, which is a deadly disease that affects the digestive system. And it's believed that that virus has wiped out a third of the gorilla population in the last 30 years. But there are people doing things about it, like with teams of vets on call 24/7, monitoring the gorillas, and armed patrols keeping a close watch on them, but also with tourism, like in Rwanda and Uganda. Gorillas attract with tourism, tracking them down with cameras rather than guns. But also, if you ever do get to go see gorillas, there are certain rules you need to follow. The main one is you need to wear a face mask, because gorillas are primates and they're closely related to us humans. They're also susceptible to our diseases, like even a simple cold could prove fatal to a mighty silverback. And so you have to wear a face mask, but also you can't bring any food with you that could be harmful to the gorillas, and you can also only see them for 1 hour, which is a strict rule that minimises disturbance to their secret lives. But of course, unfortunately, in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa, because there's still a civil war going on, which has been raging for over 20 years, that means that not a lot of people want to visit that part of the world, and a lot of poachers in the DRC are ex-military, and unfortunately a lot of rangers out there lose their lives to poachers, and of course it's But there is hope. Like, people are slowly beginning to see the error in their ways behind the civil war in the DRC, and slowly tourism is starting to come back. And if we keep up tourism and ways to protect gorillas, we could save the real King Kong from extinction. Because here is much of their range, like in Rwanda, Uganda, and the Congo. Another fact for you about gorillas is the altitude they live at can be over 2,000 metres above sea level, so way higher than the highest mountains of Britain. Now for one of the most dramatic birds of prey in Africa, the African fish eagle. The African fish eagle is one of the most amazing birds of prey that are found in Africa. Of course, they're so good at hunting that they only have to do it for like 10 minutes a day. And they have eyesight that's about 10 times more powerful than ours. And they have talons like fish hooks, and even though they have a very lightweight skeleton, they can still carry off very big prey. Of course, their favourite food is fish, hence the name. But when fish are scarce, they've been known to hunt birds as big as flamingos, will also take turtles, terrapins, and even small crocodiles. And, of course, these eagles aren't endangered or threatened in any way. There are still thousands of them in Africa across the waterways, but they are a bird that people monitor just to make sure they are okay. And as I've mentioned earlier, like they have very formidable talons, and of course, they mainly use them to grab a hold of wet, slippery fish. But as I did mention earlier, they can also take on flamingos, which are quite big birds and very difficult to catch. Of course, they are the African fish eagle pairs for life, and they have 1 or 2 chicks every breeding season. And of course, and because they only have to hunt for 10 minutes a day, they are quite successful birds, and of course, also, and in my opinion, one of the most beautiful. Here is their range in Africa. In fact, wherever there's water, you often find an African fish eagle. And now for the Sultan of Stealth, the leopard. Now, leopards are probably the most widespread of all cats, but of course, the African leopard is probably Africa's most secretive and elusive cat, and of course people rarely see them, mainly because they are mostly nocturnal, which means they're active at night, but also because of their fur. I mean, their camouflage fur can help them blend into the environment, and of course leopards in Africa can live in a wide range of habitat. They live on grasslands, the forests, the mountains, and even occasionally in cities. Of course, like all cats, they're solitary, with the exception of mothers and their young. And of course, a female leopard, when she has cubs, she has to teach them how to hunt and also protect them from predators like lions, hyenas, and baboons. And as I mentioned earlier, these animals are the sultans of stealth. Of course, also they hunt using stealth and cunning. So leopards don't indulge in an all-out chase like a cheetah. Instead, they have to creep within no more than 5 meters of their prey before they pounce, and they have canine teeth as long as my index